Every afternoon, as they were coming home from school, the children would go and play in the giant's garden. It was a magnificent garden with lots of soft green grass, lots of space to run around and lots of exciting things to discover. Here and there over the grass stood beautiful flowers like stars and 12 peach trees that broke out in delicate pink blossoms when the spring came and bore rich fruits with autumn. Birds sat upon trees and sang so sweetly the children would stop their games to listen.
How happy we are in this garden.
The giant was visiting his friend the ogre. After 7 years they had both run out of things to say to each other, which was not very much, because giants and ogres are not very good at conversation. The giant decided it was time to return home. When he arrived, he saw the children playing in his garden.
"What are you doing here?"
The giant cried with such a gruff voice he frightened the children away.
"My own garden is my own garden, and I will allow nobody to play in it but myself."
So the giant built a high wall all around it and put up a sign which read,
"Private, keep out."
He was a very selfish giant. Now the poor children had nowhere to play after school. They tried playing on the pavement.
But the pavement is too dusty and full of stones.
They tried playing on the streets nearby.
But there's nowhere for us to go.
They tried playing at home.
But it is too dull being stuck indoors all day.
Instead, the children would sit on the high wall around the garden, talking about how happy they had once been inside of it. Then spring came, and all over the country there were little blossoms and little birds. Only in the garden of the selfish giant was it still winter. Even the birds refused to sing.
"We will not sing in the garden if there are no children to hear our songs."
And so the garden had no birdsong, and the trees forgot to bloom. Once, a beautiful flower put its head out from the grass and stood up above it like a star. But when the flower saw the giant's sign, it felt so sorry for the children that it ducked its head back down into the ground and went to sleep. The only ones that were pleased were the snow and the frost. The snow covered the grass with a great white cloak, and the frost painted the bare peach trees silver. The north wind came and invited the hail to roar and blow about the garden with him, running round and as fast as they could go.
"I do not understand why the spring is so late in coming this year. I hope that the seasons will change soon."
The selfish giant was confused, looking out at his cold white garden.
"I hope that the seasons will change soon."
But in the giant's garden, spring never came, and nor did summer. Autumn gave gifts of golden fruit to all the other gardens, but none to the garden of the selfish giant.
He is too selfish. He does not deserve any of my gifts this year.
So it was always winter there, and the north wind and the hail and the frost and the snow all danced together through the trees without slowing. One morning, the giant awoke in bed to the sound of dreamlike music. The sound was so sweet to his ears that he thought a choir was singing nearby. But it was only a little blackbird singing outside of his window. It had been so long since he heard a bird sing in his garden that it seemed to him the most beautiful music in the world. At once, the north wind stopped its roaring, and the hail stopped dancing overhead, and a magical smell reached the giant through his open window.
"The spring has come at last."
He jumped out of bed to take a look. What did he see? He saw a most magical sight. Through a little hole in the garden wall, all of the children had crept in, and each was sitting on branches of the 12 peach trees. In every tree he could see a child. The trees were chattering and saying,
"We're so glad to have the children back again."
They clothed themselves with blossoms, waving their arms gently above the children's heads. The birds were flying about and twittering with delight, and the flowers began to put their heads up through the green grass and started to laugh. It was a lovely scene. Then the giant saw that in one corner of the garden it was still winter. In the farthest corner of the garden stood a little girl, all alone.
"I cannot reach the branches of the tree to climb it."
This tree was still quite covered with frost and snow, and the north wind still blew and roared above it. The tree called down hopefully,
Climb up, little one."
It bent its branches down as low as it could, but the girl was still too tiny to reach them. As the giant looked out at the little girl, his heart melted.
"How selfish I have been. Now I know why the spring would not come here. I will help that little girl to get up onto the tree, and then I will knock down my wall and take down my sign, and this garden will be a playground for children forever and ever."
He was really very sorry for what he'd done. And so the giant crept downstairs and opened his front door quite softly. He went out into the garden, but when the children saw him, they were very frightened. They cried out,
Quick, run away!
As they left, winter returned to the garden once again. Only the little girl at the farthest corner of the garden did not run, for her eyes were too full of tears to see the giant come in. The giant stole up behind the girl and took her gently in his hand and lifted her up onto the tree. At once the tree broke into blossom. The birds came to sing on it, and the little girl stretched out her 2 arms and flung them around the giant's neck, kissing him with joy. When the children saw that the giant was wicked no longer, they ran back into the garden, and with them came the spring. And the giant said to the children,
"It is your garden now, little children. I hope that you will share it with me."
Then the giant took a great axe and knocked down the wall. Later, when people came out of the nearby buildings, they found the giant playing with the children in the most beautiful garden they had ever seen. All day long the children played, and in the evening they came to bid the giant goodbye. The giant asked,
"But where is the little girl that I helped up into the tree?"
He asked because the giant loved her most of all. But the children answered,
We don't know. We've never seen her in this garden before.
"Well, if you see her, be sure and tell her to come and play here tomorrow."
Every afternoon, when school was over, the children came and played with the giant. But the little girl who the giant loved most of all was never seen again. The giant loved all of the children and was very kind to them, but he longed to see his first little friend. Years went over, and the giant grew old and tired. He could no longer play about with the children, but would sit in a huge armchair, watching them at their games and admiring the garden.
"I have a most beautiful garden."
One winter morning, the giant looked out of his bedroom window. He did not mind the winter now, because he knew that it was merely the spring asleep and the flowers were only resting. Suddenly he rubbed his eyes in wonder and looked and looked. It was a most wonderful sight. In the farthest corner of the garden was a tree quite covered with white blossoms, and its branches were golden, and little silver fruit hung there. Underneath it stood the little girl that he had missed for so long. Downstairs ran the giant in great joy. He hastened across the garden and its grass towards the child and cried,
"Where have you been? Every day I have waited to see you."
The child smiled, and a strange feeling fell upon the giant. He knelt down beside the little child, his head brushing against the white blossoms of the silver tree. The child looked into the giant's eyes and said,
Once you let me play in your garden, and today you shall come with me to play in mine.
Later that afternoon, when the children ran from school to the beautiful garden, they found the giant laying underneath the tree. The friend was covered with white blossoms and was resting like the flowers in winter.